we're having a look at the situation in Saudi Arabia, and in your column you say we should be concerned by Saudi for wrecking the ecosystem with mind-boggling wages that could have a negative blowback effect on the economics of other leagues.
Yep.
Now, what we do know is this, and the horse is kind of bolted on this one, hasn't it? Because we know Newcastle are Saudi-owned. We know about Abu Dhabi ownership of Manchester City.
They'll argue that they're not nation-states, it's just legitimate businesses owning football clubs because they can.
To which we would say...
I would say they're nation-state ownership.
Yeah. We know that leading Premier League clubs have now asked the government, the UK government, to block nation-states from owning clubs. So Premier League clubs, very nervous about this, are saying to our own government, how about you getting into the fray here and blocking nation-states from owning clubs? There has been a long consultation process with stakeholders in the English game regards the powers of a regulator. Now, that's one thing. But you do offer a couple of potential solutions in this. But can I ask you, first of all, can you take control of the situation after the event? As I said, we've seen they're in here already.
And they have every right to be.
And many players are going to Saudi to play their football. But is this the time to block state ownership of football clubs? Because how many is too many?
One is too many.
But they're already in. They're under the door and they're in.
It's a trend that we probably need to arrest. I don't think most sensible football club owners will want to see nation states with no particular parameter around what they spend and how they operate owning football clubs. The landscape has changed. We've got a globalised world and we have to accept what comes with it. You open the door to globalisation and now look at the landscape of who owns our football clubs. Always makes me slightly sad, not because I'm a little Englander, but because why other people can see the vision of the assets in this country and we as English owners can't is a different dynamic. But that's the nature of the beast and that's the world that we now live in. But when you've got this agenda, there's nothing xenophobic or any particular bias towards it. I just think when you've got a nation state, and it's a ridiculous veneer that was put up around the PIF acquisition of Newcastle. I don't care who likes it or who doesn't like it. The nation state, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, owns Newcastle United through its investment vehicle, PIF.
With endless funds.
With endless funds. And that comes with a consequence and a challenge. And I've made the observation slightly tritely the other day that the Saudis tried to pirate English football, which is what they did, which is why the dispute in the initial place between Newcastle being bought by them was the main fundamental thing, because it was clear that they were pirating the deal that was done with BeIN. That's why they paid them £1 billion compensation, and as soon as they did, off come the shackles of buying Newcastle United. And then the other side of it, now they've tried to buy English football clubs, and preferably, if they could, they would like to own a piece of the Premier League, but it's not going to work that way for them. So now they're going to go about it perhaps a different way, which is build up their own leagues and create a particular brand of chaos for the advancement of what they want. Now, I've got no issue, none whatsoever, with the Saudis building their league, investing in their league, and fulfilling the ambitions of the 36 million people that live in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that are currently turning up at 6,800 a game. I'm quite happy for them to develop their football. What I fear for, and what I think people at Masters, who I describe as central management inside the Premier League, which is their correct title, should be more focused on, is making sure that this doesn't have a negative effect on how the Premier League and leagues like it have built up a position, not because they have a God-given right to maintain it, but they also shouldn't allow it to be undermined.
No, you also say maybe we need to show some teeth to prevent further acquisitions, Saudi acquisitions of Premier League clubs. How do you do that?
Well, I think ultimately there was an agenda amongst the Premier League clubs, and I thought the Premier League had already passed this regulation that there would be no further nation states. Well, so I don't know what you're looking to the government for. What the bleeding government going to do? It's none of their business.
Well, you say, look, we've got to cement the principle that nation states cannot own English clubs. How do you do? I agree. And I see what you're saying.
I mean, you don't.
How do you outlaw it?
You don't allow this ridiculous charade that's been portrayed at Newcastle. It's done now. The deal's been done. We've all moved on from that. But that's a nation state. That's a nation state. In America, they don't like it. They don't allow. That's why the Senate is debating the acquisition of the PGA through LIV, because they don't like it, because they don't want people coming in with different agendas than sport, with a different motivation and from a different starting point, and buying what they consider to be institutional societal assets that belong to the country that these people are trying to invest in.
I get that, but let's say, for talking
stop
sake,
it.
let's say you cement that principle.
Stop it.
Let's say you cement it 24 hours from now. That's it. No more nation-state ownership. And on we go with life in the Premier League.
Sure.
That gives Manchester City and Newcastle a monopoly. Doesn't it? A duopoly.
But that's like saying, because Chelsea were early adopters of this ridiculous philosophy that Abramovich put in, which is spray cash around indiscriminately. Some people would say capitalism, and some people would say that this is the business that you're in, and ultimately you should be able to invest. And I get that argument too, to a point. But then people would say, well, hang on a second, Abramovich had 5 years of being able to do precisely what he wants. Man City come in and they get caught by financial fair play 3 years later, and all they did was precisely what Chelsea did. Chelsea got an early adopter, an early innovator situation, but the world evolves. The legislation changes. That's the nature of the beast. But if you start to move towards a control mechanism that actually underpins A, excluding certain purchasing mentalities, and B, the governance that then manages these leagues properly, so that you have to have some teeth in your financial fair play or your controls over the industry, which the regulator may have if the regulator comes in. I doubt it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And then you've got a better landscape for the sustainability of football, which was the purpose. Not this Machiavellian threat that people believe it was to keep the status quo in place.
So let's say, for talking again, say you're Richard Masters today at the top of the Premier League. There's a very real danger of two clubs becoming three clubs, because Manchester United could end up Qatari owned. So you'd introduce this now, would you? Again, no more nation-state ownership, and that cuts the Qataris out of buying Manchester United.
The Qatari ownership, the individuals that were involved in that are categorically trying to suggest that the money that they have is legitimate, privately generated wealth and has nothing to do with the government.
Do you think it is?
No, I don't. I think, of course, it's government money, and I think the Premier League has got to work a bit harder to be able to make sure that if it is private investments, it's private investment, because they just fell away. Everybody knows they just fell away. Anybody that's got half a brain knows that Newcastle United, this idea that there's a letter from the PIF fund saying there's a separation between Mohammed bin Salman's ownership or his sovereignty in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the public investment fund that own Newcastle, and they just decided to back down from that. Now, they've got to change their legislation, they've got to change their principles. I don't quite understand what they're recruiting the government to do, and where they think the government's going to get involved in this, and what they think the government's... I mean, you've got Middle Eastern ownership of so many different businesses in this country. The only thing you could say is that football is a heritage business and should be perhaps treated slightly differently because of its societal values.
Yeah.
But then you've opened the door to global investment in every way.
The problem is, Simon, if nation-state-owned clubs like Manchester City and Newcastle United, and maybe soon to come Manchester United, operate within FFP rules, then what's there to complain about?
We will see how that plays out. We've not seen any evidence that there's a particular inclination for them to do that or to want to do that. And we'll see how that plays out. But again, if you take away the principle in the first place, I'm not naive. I do recognise that with extreme wealth there comes an opportunity to find a way. And the article isn't just about suggesting that the Saudis are the devil incarnate. It's not doing that at all. Yeah. It's saying this culture in the Western media, building them up to be the biggest problem in the world of football, for me, has pros and cons to it. And we need to evaluate their challenges, because their challenges are, if they think they're going to build a league based upon players, there's only a few players in the world that can actually become bigger than a football club in terms of digital following. Ronaldo's one, Neymar may be another, but they're the exception. Yeah. Their problem is how they're going to build a league when they've got proper football clubs to compete against, and then they've got governance coming their way if they want to play at the big table.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.